Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanaka.
Welcome. Today we're diving into how Japan's early government got organized. We're talking about the shift towards what historians call a suyu, or Ritsuri state.
Right, a state governed by laws and codes. It's a foundational period, so really important context if you're just starting with Japanese history.
Absolutely. So where does this story really kick off?
Well, a lot of the groundwork starts with Emperor Tenmu. After he came to power, he took some really deliberate steps towards centralization.
Okay, let's unpack that. Emperor Tenmu. He didn't just put one big boss in charge right away.
No, interestingly, he initially ruled alongside his sons, didn't appoint a sole grand minister.
Huh. Why do that?
It seems like it might have been a way to, bring the powerful clans into the fold of this new system, rather than just fighting them head on, sort of integrate them.
Makes sense. And wasn't there a big social shakeup too? Something about ranks?
Yes, exactly. In 684, he established the Yakuza no Kabane, the 8 noble ranks.
8 ranks. What was the significance of that?
It basically redefined the whole social hierarchy. It wasn't just about clan power anymore. Families were ranked based on their perceived closeness, their kinship to the imperial line.
Ah, perceived kinship. So it put the imperial family firmly at the very top, defining who was important based on relation to them.
Precisely. It recentered everything around the emperor.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just social stuff. Tenmu also got the ball rolling on compiling laws, the Ritsuryō we mentioned, and even a national history.
Wow, okay, so he was really building the scaffolding for a unified state laws, history, social structure.
Definitely laying the foundations. Then, after him, his consort, Empress Chitu, really picked up the pace.
Empress Chitu, what were her key contributions?
Well, a major one was putting the Asuka Kiyomihara Code into effect in 689.
The Asuka Kiyomihara Code, so more laws and regulations.
Exactly. Another step towards formalizing how things were run. But maybe even more visibly, she oversaw the building of Fujiwara-kyūs.
Fujiwara-kyu, now that sounds significant.
Oh, it was. This was Japan's first proper, large-scale capital city built on the Chinese model. A grid plan, the works.
A planned city. That's a huge undertaking for the time, and actually moved the capital there.
Yep. In 694, the court relocated from Asuka to Fujiwara-kyu, a very clear signal of a new era.
So how big was this new capital?
Well, initially, based on where the palace was, people thought maybe 2 kilometers east-west by 3 kilometers north-south, which was already pretty big for 7th century Japan.
Okay, impressive enough. But I feel like there's more to the story.
There is. Archaeology changed the picture quite a bit. Finds in the late 70s and then mid-90s pushed the boundaries out significantly.
How much bigger are we talking?
We're looking at something like 5.3 kilometers east-west.
Whoa.
Yeah. And then further finds suggested maybe 4.8 kilometers north-south. It points towards a massive grid plan, 10 avenues each way.
10 by 10 avenues, that's enormous for the period. It really speaks to the level of organization and ambition, doesn't it?
Absolutely. A truly monumental urban center, showcasing the power of the centralizing state.
Okay, so we have new laws taking shape, a redefined social order, this incredible new capital.
Yeah.
What was the final capstone on this Ritsuri state building?
That would be the Taiyu Taifuk, finalized in 701 under Emperor Monmu. Key figures were Princess Okabe and Fujiwara no Fuhito.
The Taihu Code,
Right.
This is the big one, isn't it? This is what really cemented Japan as a state.
Yes, this comprehensive set of penal and administrative laws really marked the full establishment of the Ritsuri state. It laid out the blueprint.
But it wasn't just about laws and government structure, was it? There was more going on in terms of identity and imperial power.
Definitely. Around this same time, the idea of hereditary succession, the throne passing down within the direct imperial line, really solidified.
Ah, okay. That makes sense for stability, right? A clear line of who's next.
Exactly. Strengthened the center. And something else fundamental happened. The country's name changed.
The name, from what to what?
Well, previously, China often called Japan Wa, and Japan used that character too, sometimes also Ina. But from the late 7th, early 8th century, they started officially using Nihon.
Nihon. The name's still used today. Why the change? Was it a conscious rebranding?
It seems so. We actually have Chinese records, like the old Book of Tang, mentioning a Japanese envoy back in 648 saying the name had changed from Wa to Nihon.
Wow, they actually told the Tang court.
Apparently so. And the name Nihon started being used formally in diplomatic missions to Tang China from 702 onwards.
So declaring the new name internationally?
Right. And we even have physical evidence, like the tombstone of Abe no Nakamaro, an envoy to Tang China, which explicitly says the country is called Japan.
That's fascinating. So when exactly did the name change officially happen?
The precise moment is debated, but it's very likely it happened during Emperor Tenmu's big push for state building. It fits the pattern of consolidating identity.
It all ties together: laws, capital, succession, even the name. Okay, let's dive into the nuts and bolts. How did the government actually work under the Taihu Code?
Okay, so the code itself borrowed heavily from Tang China, especially the penal code, the
Yeah.
Ritsuryō, but the administrative code, the Ito-ri, was adapted quite a bit for Japanese circumstances.
So not just a copy-paste job, they tailored it. What did the central government look like?
The main body was the Taihokuko, the Grand Council of State. Think of it as the cabinet or central administration.
Who is in it?
It was mostly the top nobles, the Ochikugi, third rank or higher. You had key posts like the Grand Minister, Taiso, Daichogin, though that was often empty.
Like a symbolic top spot?
Kind of, yeah. Then the minister to the left, Daisajin, minister to the right, Kosijukabijin Daijujajin, and the major counselor, Daishudagam. Later, they added middle counselors and regular counselors, too.
A council of powerful figures. How did they make decisions?
Decisions were supposed to be by consensus among these top officials. But crucially, nothing happened without the emperor's okay. Imperial sanction was needed.
So the emperors still held ultimate authority?
Yes. And then, once a decision was made and proved, the 8 ministries, the Ritsuryō, were responsible for actually carrying it out.
8 ministries doing the day-to-day work. What about the people in these top jobs? Did they get perks?
Oh yes, big time. High rank meant economic benefits, stipends like ipolku and kirku, plus land grants, iti, eden, and fuku.
Land and money based on rank.
Right, and the system of ka, kanisutsunose, meant your official post generally matched your court rank. Plus, there was the ius oninose.
Honey, no say, what was that?
Basically, it gave the sons and even grandsons of the very top ranks of high-ranking nobles, 5th rank and up, a leg up. They automatically got certain rights and advantages in getting official posts.
So privilege could definitely be passed down. It wasn't purely meritocratic.
Not at the highest levels, no. Rank and lineage mattered a lot.
What about the law itself? You mentioned a penal code, the Ritsu. What kinds of punishments were there?
There were 5 punishments, the nuje, gokei. These ranged from light flogging, ichi, and heavy flogging, up to penal servitude, udu, exile, uru, and finally death, ushi.
A pretty standard range of punishments for the time, I suppose. Did everyone face these equally?
Not quite. Nobles and officials had certain privileges. For lesser crimes, they might avoid things like imprisonment and instead face dismissal or fines, often based on their father's or grandfather's rank.
Clearly a system that reflected the social hierarchy. Okay, that's the center. How was the rest of the country run, the local administration?
The country was divided up. You had the capital region, the Kinai, and then 7 large circuits, the Guya Shishidi.
Like big administrative regions.
Exactly. And within those circuits, you had provinces, kukuni, then districts, and finally villages.
So a nested structure. Who was in charge at each level?
At the province level, the kokushi, the governor, was appointed by the central government. But for the districts, the benji, the magistrate, was often chosen from powerful local families, maybe the descendants of the old regional rulers.
Interesting. So a mix of central appointees and local power brokers. And the villages.
Each village had a shakuslershichi, a village head.
What were their main jobs? What did these local officials do?
A huge part of it was keeping records. They maintained the household registers, eikoseki, and the tax registers, essential for knowing who was where and who owed what.
Bureaucracy in action. Keeping track of everyone.
Pretty much. Villages were organized into units of about 50 households, which was the basic unit for administration and tax collection.
Were there any areas with special administration outside the standard province district setup?
Yes, a few key spots. The capital itself had its own offices, the Hakushiki and Wukuchiki for the left and right halves of the city.
Makes sense for the capital. Anywhere else?
Setsu Province, which included the major port of Naniwa, modern Osaka, had its own office, the Daosetsushiki. And then in Kyushu, which was vital for defense and foreign contact, you had the Tafu Dazaifu.
Dazaifu, what did that do?
It was like a governor general's office for Kyushu. It handled foreign relations, military matters, and oversaw the provinces in that region. A really important outpost.
So a really quite detailed system, top to bottom, with special zones for important areas. You mentioned earlier that Japan adapted the Tang Chinese system. Can we compare them a bit more?
Yeah, that's important. While the idea of Ritsuryō came from China, developed over centuries there, really hitting its stride in the Sui and Tang dynasties, the emphasis was different.
How so?
In China, there was a strong philosophical emphasis on we, rights, social order, propriety as the main way to keep society harmonious. Law, when fa, was seen more as a tool for when rights failed, basically for punishment. So their system tended to put more weight on the penal code, the Ritsu.
Okay, so rights first, law as a backup in China. What about Japan?
Japan adopted Ritsuryō more pragmatically, really focusing on setting up the administrative machinery of a centralized state. So they put more emphasis on the administrative code, the airi, and were much more willing to change things to fit their own needs.
They were building a government structure, first and foremost. Any specific examples of big differences in the structure itself?
A classic one is the Sujingikan, the Department of Divinities.
Ah, we touched on that. It sat alongside the main council of state, the Daijikun.
Exactly. It was dedicated purely to Shinto matters, rituals, shrines. That kind of parallel structure, giving native religious institutions such a formal place, wasn't really there in the Tang model. It shows the integration of indigenous beliefs.
A very Japanese adaptation. But were there other big differences, maybe in things like land or taxes?
Oh, absolutely. The land allocation system, Ducharansei, the tax system, Sochuchi, even the military system, also is in Shoanhaise, while inspired by China, they ended up looking quite different in practice in Japan.
And they kept tweaking it, right? You mentioned other regulations.
Yes, they kept issuing kyaku, which were like amendments or supplementary rules, and shiki, which detailed enforcement procedures. It shows the system wasn't static. They were constantly adjusting it.
Adapting on the fly. Okay, let's shift focus completely. What was life like for the average person, the farmers, under this whole Ritsuryō system?
Right. The vast majority were soitum, public citizens, mostly farmers. The key thing governing their lives was the Hisijobanes Honden Shuju, the land allocation law.
The government giving out land. How did that work?
Every 6 years, based on the household registers, land Chukubundan was supposed to be allotted to everyone over 6 years old.
Everyone, men and women.
Yes, though amounts differed. Men got a standard plot, about 210, which is roughly maybe half an acre, a bit more. Women got 2/3 of that. Even slaves got a small share, 1/3.
Interesting. And this land was laid out in that grid pattern you mentioned.
Generally, yes. The Yonjikwai system aimed for orderly rectangular plots. People could farm their plot for life, but they couldn't sell it. When someone died, the land went back to the state at the next redistribution.
So, use rights, not ownership. What did the farmers owe the state in return? It sounds like a lot of obligations.
It was. There was the mainland tax, about 3% of the rice harvest paid locally. Then a tribute of regional goods, silk, cloth, other local products sent to the capital.
Okay, rice tax and goods tax. What else?
There was yuch, which was originally labor service in the capital, but often it was replaced by a payment in cloth or rice instead. Plus gruchish, which was miscellaneous labor for local projects like road building or maintenance.
So taxes in kind, taxes in goods, and labor duties.
And military service, shishi, was another potential obligation, though not everyone served. Conscripts might serve locally or be sent to the capital as guards, chuchuiji, or even to the Kyushu frontier as border guards, kusasaki mori.
That's a heavy load. Did the farmers have to transport the taxes themselves?
Often, yes, especially the yuchus and goods heading for the capital. That was another burden, carrying these things potentially long distances.
Oof, that sounds rough. Was there any kind of safety net or support?
Well, there was something called alt, kusuko, public loans. The government would lend seed rice in the spring.
Okay, that sounds helpful.
But it had to be repaid in the autumn with 50% interest.
50%? Wow, was this optional?
Often, it was effectively compulsory. The interest was used to fund local government, but yeah, that 50% rate could be crippling for farmers as a major source of hardship.
Compulsory loans at high interest. It doesn't paint a rosy picture. Do we have any accounts from the time about what life was really like?
We do, actually. The famous poetry anthology, the Eikshvei Monshu, contains some incredibly powerful poems. Look for the poverty dialogue songs. Henki Manuka by Yamanue no Okura.
Yamanu Okura. Who was he?
He was actually a provincial governor in Kyushu in the early 8th century. So he saw the conditions firsthand. His poems, these long verses called Dani Tuka, they really depict the grim reality for many farmers. Not enough food or clothes, leaky roofs, and the tax collectors breathing down their necks.
Poems from a governor describing poverty, that's quite something. It gives you a real sense of the pressures.
It really does. It balances the picture of this grand, organized state with the struggles of the people living under it.
Okay, so we have the farmers, the komin. Was everyone just a commoner? Or was there a more defined social structure below the nobility?
There was. Society was broadly split into A, yumin, the good people or commoners, which included most farmers, and yin, and the base people.
Senmin. Who fell into that category?
There were 5 designated types. The chukinin. These included imperial tomb keepers. The chokinin, korshikinin. These included imperial tomb keepers, government slaves, private retainers, dukinin, and then public slaves, tukunuers, and private slaves.
So different categories of unfree or lower status people. Did they have different rights or obligations?
Yes, their status affected things like land allocation amounts, the type of labor they did, and their general legal standing. It was definitely a hierarchical system.
How did this compare to China's system of base people? Was it as rigid?
That's an interesting point. While modeled on Tang law, the Senmin system in Japan seems to have been, well, perhaps less rigid or extensive. There were fewer people classified as Senmin compared to China. The lines weren't always perfectly sharp, and we know intermarriage between Ryumin and Senmin did happen.
So while the categories existed on paper, the social reality might have been a bit more fluid in Japan.
It seems that way, yes. Another example of adaptation, perhaps.
This has been incredibly thorough. We've really traced the journey from Tenmu's initial reforms all the way to the established Ritsuryō state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
From the early codes in the Akusa no Kabane through the massive project of Fujiwara-Q culminating in the Taihu Code, we've looked at central and local government, how compared to China, and importantly, the lives of ordinary people within this system, from land allocation and taxes right down to the social divisions.
You should really have a much clearer picture now of how this foundational period of Japanese governance took shape.
So thinking about this whole process, taking a foreign model like the Chinese legal system and adapting it so thoroughly to Japanese needs, how might that pattern of borrowing and adapting echo through later Japanese history? Or even, how do nations today grapple with integrating external ideas into their own governance?
That's a great question. And what aspect of the Ritsuryō system itself strikes you as most surprising or maybe most telling about the society at the time? Was it the sheer detail of the bureaucracy, the privileges of the elite, the burdens on the farmers, the existence of the Jingi Khan? What leaves you with more questions as you continue exploring Japan's past?